The bullet struck the branch just inches from Madeline Owens' head, splintering bark and sending a fledgling sparrow tumbling to the dusty earth below. It was 1878 in the unforgiving Arizona Territory, and death came as swiftly as the summer lightning, but this time it had missed its mark. Madeline dropped to her knees, her heart pounding against her corset as she scanned the sparse cover of mesquite trees. The would-be assailant was nowhere to be seen, having likely mistaken her for game or perhaps something more sinister. She pushed the thought aside as the wounded bird's frantic chirping drew her attention. "Poor thing," she whispered, carefully scooping the trembling creature into her palm, its wing bent at an awkward angle, blood spotting its downy feathers. "You and I are both far from home, aren't we?" She tucked the bird into the pocket of her apron and retrieved her basket of medicinal herbs. At 26, Madeline had come west from Boston to escape the suffocating expectations that followed a widowed nurse with no children. Camp Verde seemed as good a place as any to start anew, though the 5 months since her arrival had been anything but easy. The sun climbed higher as she made her way down the rocky path toward town, her thoughts consumed by the tiny life cradled against her side. So distracted was she that she failed to notice the rider until his shadow fell across her path. "Madam, you shouldn't be out here alone." The voice was deep, tinged with concern rather than threat. Madeline looked up to find a man astride a chestnut mare, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Dust coated his leather vest and faded blue shirt, speaking of long days on the trail. "I was gathering herbs," she replied, lifting her basket slightly. "I'm the new healer in Camp Verde." The man tilted his head, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds. "Owen Whitaker," he offered. "Most folks call me Whit." His gaze dropped to her hand as it hovered protectively over her pocket. "You're hurt." "No, but this little one is." She carefully revealed the injured sparrow. "Someone was shooting too close to the trail. Nearly got us both." Owen dismounted in one fluid motion, his movements betraying years in the saddle. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, a man in his early 30s who'd seen his share of hardship. Probably Jenkins' boy. Always shooting at shadows. He leaned closer, examining the bird without touching it. "Wings broken. You planning to help it?" "I aim to try. I don't suppose you know where I might find a small box to keep it in." Something shifted in Owen's expression, a softening she hadn't expected. "I've got something better than a box at my place. It's on your way to town." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "My pa was fond of nursing injured creatures, left behind some supplies that might help." Madeline hesitated. She'd learned to be cautious around men, especially in this wild country. Yet something in Owen's weather-worn face spoke of honesty. "I'd be grateful for the help, Mr. Whitaker." "Just Whit, madam. Only the bank manager calls me Mr. Whitaker, usually when I'm late on payments." A hint of a smile touched his lips as he helped her mount his horse, then led them on foot down the winding trail. They crested a small rise, revealing a modest homestead nestled against the backdrop of red rock formations. A sturdy cabin with a stone chimney stood beside a corral housing several horses. The land around it showed signs of careful tending, unusual in a territory where most men focused solely on mining or cattle. "It's lovely," Madeline said, genuinely surprised by the evident care taken with the property. Owen glanced back at her, something guarded in his expression. "It was my parents' dream. Been trying to keep it going since they passed." He helped her dismount when they reached the yard, his hand strong but gentle at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her body that she quickly dismissed as simple gratitude for his assistance. "Let me show you inside," he said, leading the way. "Watch your step." "I wasn't expecting company." The cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, its main room dominated by a stone fireplace and sturdy wooden furniture. What caught Madeline's attention, however, was the curious collection of small cages and boxes arranged on shelves along one wall. "Your father's work?" she asked, moving closer to examine what looked like a miniature splint sized for a rabbit's leg. Pa believed everything deserved a chance at healing. Owen moved to a chest in the corner, producing a small woven basket lined with soft cloth. "Used to drive my mother crazy, all the creatures he'd bring home. This might work for your bird." Madeline gently transferred the sparrow to the basket. The poor thing chirped weakly, its eyes bright with fear. "I'll need to stabilize that wing before I can move him again. I've got some thin splints Pa made, and willow bark tea for the pain." When Madeline looked at him with surprise, he added, "Learned a few things growing up in this house." She worked efficiently, her nurse's training evident in every careful movement as she assessed the damage. The wing was broken, but clean, no compound fracture that would have meant certain death for the small creature. Owen proved an able assistant, following her instructions without question, his large hands surprisingly deft at holding the bird steady while she worked. "There," she said finally, settling the splinted sparrow back into its basket. "With proper care, he might fly again." "And if not?" Owen asked, watching her closely. "Then I'll have made his passing more comfortable." She met his eyes steadily. "Not all healing ends in recovery, Mr. Whitaker. Sometimes it's just about easing the journey." Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps. "Sounds like you've seen your share of both outcomes." "I was a nurse during the war and after." She didn't elaborate on which war. The memories of field hospitals filled with broken men still haunted her dreams. "But I've found people are often more complicated to heal than birds." Owen nodded, then moved to the small kitchen area. "You'll be wanting to get back to town before dark. Let me fix you something to eat first." "Oh, I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. Been a while since I cooked for anyone but myself." He was already slicing bread, his back to her in a way that suggested the matter was settled. Madeline used the time to explore the cabin, noting the books on the shelf, many on natural history and medicine, alongside poetry volumes that seemed at odds with the rugged surroundings. A daguerreotype on the mantel showed a stern-faced couple standing behind a younger Owen, perhaps 15 years ago. The woman's hand rested on his shoulder in a gesture of quiet pride. "Your parents?" she asked when Owen returned with a simple but appealing meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. "Yes." He set the plates on the table. "Pa was a surveyor before settling here. Mother taught school back east before following him west. Both gone 5 years now. Fever took them both within a month of each other." "I'm sorry," she said, recognizing the familiar shape of old grief in his words. "It's hard to lose those we love." Owen's eyes met hers, seeming to assess whether her sympathy came from understanding or mere politeness. Whatever he saw appeared to satisfy him. "The bird can stay here tonight," he offered. "I know how to tend it, and you can come back tomorrow if you'd like." Madeline considered the proposal. The little sparrow had settled into sleep, its breathing more regular now. Moving it again might cause unnecessary stress. "That's very kind. I'll return in the morning with proper medicines." She gathered her basket of herbs. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Whitaker." "Owen," he corrected, walking her to the door. "If we're going to be nursing this bird together, might as well use my given name." "Then you must call me Madeline." She smiled, unexpectedly charmed by his straightforward manner. "Madeline," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I'll keep watch over our patient until tomorrow." As she walked the remaining mile to town, the setting sun painting the cliffs in brilliant orange and crimson, Madeline found herself thinking of Owen Whitaker's weathered hands and the gentleness with which they had held the fragile bird. In a land defined by harshness, such tenderness was as rare as rain in summer and perhaps just as essential. The following morning dawned clear and already warm, promising another scorching day. Madeline finished her rounds at the small infirmary early, packing a basket with salves and tinctures that might help the injured sparrow. She'd spent a restless night, her thoughts returning repeatedly to the quiet cabin and its solitary occupant. The walk to Owen's homestead seemed shorter in daylight. As she approached, she noticed him in the vegetable garden beside the cabin, his broad shoulders bent over a row of corn. He straightened at her approach, shielding his eyes against the sun. "You came," he said, sounding faintly surprised. "I said I would." She lifted her basket. "How's our patient?" Owen's face broke into a smile that transformed his features. "Feisty. Been chirping since dawn. Come see." Inside, the sparrow was indeed more alert, though it fluttered in alarm when they approached. Owen spoke to it in low, soothing tones until it settled. "You've a way with him," Madeline observed, unpacking her supplies. "Just patience. Same as with frightened horses or people." He watched as she prepared a mixture in a small dish. "What's that?" "Crushed seeds soaked in herb water." "Might entice him to eat." She offered the dish. "Would you like to try feeding him? He seems to trust you." Their fingers brushed as he took the dish, the brief contact sending that same unexpected warmth through her. Owen's eyes flickered to hers, suggesting he'd felt it too, before he turned his attention to the bird. Over the next hour, they worked together to clean the splint and coax the sparrow to take nourishment. The creature's determined struggle to live, despite its injury, touched something in Madeline. When she finally sat back, satisfied with their efforts, she found Owen watching her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "You missed your calling as a veterinarian," he said. She smiled. "My father would have agreed with you. He was a doctor who often said I had more compassion for his patients' pets than for the patients themselves." "Is he still practicing?" "No." The familiar ache of loss washed through her. "He died during a typhoid outbreak when I was 19. My husband followed 3 years later pneumonia." Owen's expression softened with understanding. "Seems we've both seen our share of grief. It's the way of things, I suppose." She busied herself packing her supplies. "Life takes as often as it gives. Yet here you are, fighting to save a bird most would consider too small to matter." He gestured toward the sparrow, now sleeping peacefully. "That says something about you, Madeline Owens. As your help says something about you, Owen Whitaker." Their eyes met, holding for a moment too long to be merely polite. Madeline looked away first, suddenly conscious of being alone with him in a way she hadn't been the day before. "I should return to town," she said. "There's a new family arrived with a sick child I promised to check on." Owen nodded, then hesitated. "The bird needs regular feeding, perhaps. Perhaps you might come again tomorrow, or I could bring him to you in town, if that's more convenient." "Tomorrow would be fine. I can come in the afternoon." Thus began a routine that continued for nearly 2 weeks. Each day, Madeline would visit the cabin, bringing fresh medicines and an increasingly diverse array of conversation. Each day, the sparrow grew stronger, and each day, the space between her and Owen seemed to shrink imperceptibly. She learned that he ran cattle on the hills beyond his homestead, that he could read Latin thanks to his mother's insistence, and that he hadn't crossed the territorial line in over a decade. He discovered her fondness for wild strawberries, her habit of humming when concentrating, and her secret delight in thunderstorms. What neither mentioned was the tension that had begun to simmer between them, the way his hand would linger when passing her something, or how her breath would catch when he stood close. Madeline told herself it was merely loneliness on both their parts, nothing more. On the 12th day, as summer heat shimmered across the land, she arrived to find Owen's property unusually quiet. No sign of him in the garden or corral. Concerned, she approached the cabin and knocked. "Owen," she called when no answer came. "Are you home?" The door swung open to reveal him standing in shirt sleeves, his hair damp as if recently washed. The cabin behind him was transformed, surfaces polished, floor swept, and a vase of wildflowers adorning the table. "I wasn't expecting you so early," he said, a flush creeping up his neck. "It's the same time as always." She couldn't help smiling at his obvious discomfort. "Were you expecting different company?" No, I just—" He ran a hand through his hair. "Thought I might make things more presentable, for once." The gesture touched her more deeply than she cared to admit. "It looks lovely." She moved past him to the shelf where they kept the bird. "How's our patient today?" The sparrow greeted her with a flurry of wings, still awkward but with growing strength. "Look at you," she murmured, "testing those wings already." Owen came to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell the soap he'd used. "He tried to fly this morning, made it from the basket to the table before landing rather ungracefully." "That's wonderful progress." She turned, not realizing how near he was until they were face to face, barely a hand's width between them. "I think we might be able to release him soon." And then, Owen's voice had dropped lower, his eyes intent on hers, "then he'll be wild again." She couldn't look away from his gaze. "Free to go where he chooses. And you, Madeline, where will you go when there's no more injured bird to tend?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Madeline felt her heart racing, uncertain how to navigate this unexpected turn. I should check his wing," she said, stepping back to safer ground. Owen allowed the retreat, though something like disappointment flickered across his features. "Of course." They worked in unusual silence, the easy rhythm of previous days disrupted by the question still hovering in the air. As Madeline prepared to leave, Owen walked her to the door as always. "There's a social at the church Saturday evening," he said suddenly. "Dancing and such. I wondered if you might want to attend. With me." The invitation startled her. In all their conversations, they'd never ventured into territory that might be considered courting. "As friends," he added quickly, misreading her hesitation. "Just thought you might enjoy the company." Madeline looked up at him. This man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who spoke to birds in gentle tones and washed his cabin floor before her visits. A man who, she was beginning to realize, had worked his way into her thoughts in a manner entirely unrelated to their feathered patient. "I'd like that," she said finally. "As friends." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'll come for you at 6 then." That night, Madeline stood before her small mirror, assessing her appearance with an attention she hadn't given it in years. The green dress she'd chosen was one of her few concessions to fashion, its modest cut nevertheless flattering to her figure. She'd pinned her auburn hair in a style that softened the angles of her face, allowing a few curls to frame her cheeks. "This is foolishness," she told her reflection. "You're a widow of 5 years, not some blushing girl at her first dance." Yet she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation in her stomach as the hour approached. When a knock came precisely at 6, she took a steadying breath before opening the door. Owen stood on her small porch, hat in hand, wearing a clean black coat over a crisp white shirt. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. The transformation from rugged rancher to gentleman caller was striking. "You look beautiful," he said simply, the directness of his gaze leaving no doubt as to his sincerity. "As do you." She smiled at his raised eyebrow. "Handsome, I mean." He offered his arm with a formality that almost made her laugh. "Shall we?" The church hall was transformed for the occasion, lanterns casting a warm glow over rough-hewn tables laden with food. A small band played in one corner, couples already moving across the cleared space in time to the music. Madeline recognized most faces: the blacksmith and his wife, the mercantile owner, several ranching families from outlying properties. What she hadn't expected was their reaction to her arrival with Owen. Conversations paused, heads turned, and more than one knowing smile was exchanged. Clearly, their daily visits had not gone unnoticed by the small community. "Everyone's staring," she murmured as Owen led her toward the refreshment table. "That's because you're the prettiest woman here," he replied, then winked. "And I'm the luckiest man." Before she could respond to this outrageous flattery, they were surrounded by well-wishers. Mrs. Peterson from the general store, whose arthritis Madeline had treated. Mr. Barnes, whose daughter had recovered from scarlet fever under her care. And Sheriff Taylor, who nodded approvingly at Owen. "About time you rejoined the living, Whitaker," the sheriff said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Been holed up on that ranch too long." Owen's smile tightened slightly. "Been busy, Jim. Too busy for 5 years. The older man shook his head. "Well, at least you found good reason to come back to town." He tipped his hat to Madeline. "You're good for him, Miss Owens. Man needs more than cattle for company." As the sheriff moved away, Madeline glanced at Owen. 5 years, he looked uncomfortable. "Since my parents died. Didn't see much point in socializing. Until now." She couldn't help asking, curiosity overcoming discretion. His eyes met hers, direct and unflinching. "Until you." The simple admission stole her breath. Before she could formulate a response, the band struck up a lively tune, and Owen held out his hand. "Would you do me the honor?" Madeline hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer. Fortunate, then, that I am." He led her to the dance floor with surprising confidence, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers firmly. She had expected competence at best, given his solitary existence, but Owen moved with grace and assurance, guiding her through the steps as if they'd danced together for years. The strength in his arms as he turned her, the warmth of his hand at her back, these sensations awakened something in Madeline that had lain dormant since her husband's death, something she had believed gone forever. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked as he spun her back to him. "My mother insisted, said no son of hers would step on a lady's toes." His smile held a touch of melancholy. "She'd be pleased to know her lesson stuck. She'd be proud of the man you've become," Madeline said softly. Owen's step faltered slightly, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I hope so." They danced 2 more sets before taking a break for refreshments. As they sipped lemonade at a small table, Madeline became aware of the curious glances still being cast their way. "I feel like we're on display," she murmured. "Small towns," Owen shrugged. "Everyone's always looking for something to talk about." He paused, studying her. "Does it bother you being seen with me?" "No." The vehemence of her response surprised even her. "No, not at all. It's been a long time since I was the subject of gossip. If it helps, they've been gossiping about me for years. The hermit rancher who talks to animals and only comes to town for supplies." His smile held no bitterness. "Now they'll just have something new to speculate about." "And what would that be?" His eyes held hers, serious despite his light tone. "Whether I'm courting the pretty new healer, or if she's just taken pity on a lonely cowboy." The directness of the question left no room for evasion. Madeline felt her heart pounding as she considered her answer. 5 years she'd been alone, focused only on survival and her work. She'd come west to escape the pitying looks, the whispers of "poor young widow." Never had she imagined finding this, whatever this was, in the harsh beauty of the Arizona territory. "And which is it?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I'd very much like to court you properly, Madeline Owens, if you'd allow it." The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. "I think I'd like that too." The evening passed in a blur after that, more dancing, conversations with townspeople who seemed genuinely pleased to see Owen emerging from his self-imposed isolation, and the warm pressure of his hand at her back as he guided her through the crowd. When the last dance ended and he walked her home through the star-filled night, Madeline felt lighter than she had in years. At her door, Owen removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "I had a fine time tonight." "As did I." She smiled up at him, finding courage in the shadows. "Perhaps we could do it again sometime." "I'd like that." He hesitated, then slowly, giving her every chance to step away, leaned down to press a gentle kiss to her cheek. "Good night, Madeline." The touch of his lips, though brief, sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "Good night, Owen." Inside, she pressed a hand to her cheek, feeling like a girl after her first dance rather than a widow of 26. Something had changed tonight, something that had been building since the moment he'd helped her with a wounded bird. Whether it would lead to joy or heartbreak remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, Madeline found herself eager to discover what tomorrow might bring. The following weeks unfolded in a pattern that quickly became the sweetest routine of Madeline's life. Each morning brought patients at her small infirmary, children with fevers, minors with injuries, women seeking remedies for various ailments. Each afternoon, when her work permitted, she would walk to Owen's homestead, ostensibly to check on the sparrow's recovery, but increasingly to simply enjoy his company. Their time together shifted gradually from tending the bird to sharing the everyday tasks of ranch life. Owen taught her to gather eggs without getting pecked, to tell when corn was ready for harvest, to recognize the signs of approaching storms in the distant mountains. In return, she showed him how to make poultices from desert plants, to stitch a wound with minimal scarring, to bake bread the way her grandmother had taught her. The sparrow grew stronger by the day, testing its wings with increasing confidence, hopping from perch to perch within the cabin. Soon, they were leaving the window open, allowing its short flights into the yard before it would return, still seeking the security of the basket Owen had prepared. "He's almost ready," Madeline said one evening as they watched the bird preening on the windowsill. "Another week, perhaps." Owen nodded, though she noticed a shadow cross his face. Nature taking its course. They sat on the porch, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and crimson. A comfortable silence stretched between them, the kind that comes only with growing intimacy. Madeline found herself studying his profile, the straight nose, the strong jaw now often clean-shaved when he expected her visit, the slight crinkle at the corner of his eye. "You're staring," he said without looking at her, a smile in his voice, "just thinking about how strange life is." She turned her gaze to the distant mountains. 6 months ago, I was alone in Boston, convinced my life would be nothing but work until old age claimed me. Now here I sit, in a territory I'd barely heard of, watching the sunset with a man I met because of a wounded bird. Owen reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "Fate has curious ways." "You believe in fate?" she asked, genuinely curious. He considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I believe there are currents in life that carry us places we might never have gone by our own navigation." His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "Whether that's fate or chance, I couldn't say, but I'm grateful for whatever current brought you here." The warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. They had shared brief touches, chaste kisses that left her wanting more, but both had been cautious about moving too quickly. Now, as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Madeline felt the careful boundaries between them shifting. "Owen," she said softly, her free hand reaching to touch his face. He turned into her touch, pressing a kiss to her palm that was far from chaste. "Madeline." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. When he leaned forward to kiss her properly, she met him halfway. Unlike the tentative kisses they'd shared before, this was deep and searching, his hand sliding into her hair as he drew her closer. Madeline responded with a hunger that surprised her, years of loneliness and carefully maintained control crumbling beneath the sweet pressure of his mouth on hers. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks." "What took you so long?" she whispered, delighting in his surprised laugh, trying to be a gentleman. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing across her lower lip. "You deserve proper courting. And this isn't proper," she smiled against his thumb. "Not by my mother's standards." But he kissed her again anyway, longer and deeper, until Madeline felt dizzy with wanting. A sudden clap of thunder broke the moment, both of them starting at the unexpected sound. Dark clouds had gathered while they were lost in each other, the storm Owen had predicted that morning arriving earlier than expected. "You should get back to town before this hits," he said reluctantly, helping her to her feet. Madeline looked at the threatening sky, then back to the warmth of the cabin behind them. The propriety she'd lived by her entire life warred with the longing that had awakened in her heart. "Or I could stay." Owen's eyes darkened at her words, understanding their implication. "People would talk." "People already talk," she smiled, emboldened by the desire evident in his face. "I'm a grown woman, Owen. A widow, not an innocent girl." He studied her for a long moment, as if assessing whether she truly meant what she was suggesting. Then he nodded, decision made, and led her back inside as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. The cabin felt different in the growing darkness, intimate in a way it hadn't been during her daytime visits. Owen moved about lighting lamps, his movements betraying a nervousness that endeared him to her even more. The sparrow chirped from its basket, disturbed by the thunder that now rolled continuously overhead. "I'll check on him," Madeline said, glad for the momentary distraction. The bird settled as she stroked its head gently, its trust in her touch a testament to their weeks of care. "There now, it's just a storm. Nothing to fear." She felt Owen behind her before she heard him, the heat of his body a tangible presence. His hands came to rest lightly on her shoulders. "Madeline," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Are you certain about staying?" She turned to face him, finding courage in the evident care behind his question. "I'm certain about you, Owen Whitaker. The rest we can figure out together." The rain intensified, drumming on the roof as lightning illuminated the room in brief, brilliant flashes. Neither noticed, lost as they were in each other's arms in the discovery of touch and taste and whispered words of need. When Owen finally carried her to his bed, Madeline went willingly, her heart racing with anticipation rather than fear. Their joining was tender at first, then urgent with long-denied passion. Owen's hands learned the curves of her body as hers explored the hard planes of his, each touch a revelation, each whispered endearment a promise. When they finally lay spent in each other's arms, the storm still raging outside, Madeline felt a peace she hadn't known since before the war took so much from so many. "I love you," Owen whispered against her hair, the words so soft she almost thought she'd imagined them. "I think I've loved you since you showed up at my door with a broken bird and determination in your eyes. Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. "I love you too," she said, the admission breaking free from a heart she'd thought closed forever. "Though I tried very hard not to." He chuckled, pulling her closer. "Why would you try not to? Because love means risking loss again." She pressed her face into his chest, inhaling the scent that had become so dear to her. "And I wasn't sure I could survive losing someone else I cared for." Owen's arms tightened around her. "I can't promise forever, Madeline. No one can. But I can promise to cherish every day we're given, whether that's 50 years or 50 days. She raised her head to look at him, this man who had somehow breached all her careful defenses. "That sounds remarkably like a proposal, Mr. Whitaker." His eyes, serious in the lamplight, held hers. "Would you consider such a proposal if it were offered?" Madeline's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Are you offering?" "I'm asking if I should." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I don't have much beyond this land and a decent herd. I know town life might suit you better." She silenced him with a kiss. "Ask me properly, Owen." A slow smile spread across his face. He sat up, bringing her with him, then took her hands in his. "Madeline Owens, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love you, protect you, and build a life with you for as long as we both shall live." Through tears that now fell freely, she nodded. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Owen Whitaker." The storm outside seemed to celebrate with them, lightning illuminating their joy as rain washed the world clean. Later, as they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Madeline thought of the wounded sparrow that had brought them together, and how sometimes the most unexpected paths led to the greatest happiness. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the windows, and the cheerful chirping of birds, including their healing patient, who hopped about its basket with growing confidence. Madeline woke slowly, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous night flooded back. She turned to find Owen watching her, his expression so tender it made her heart ache. "Good morning," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Morning." She stretched, acutely aware of her state of undress beneath the quilt. "What time is it? Early yet?" His hand traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Though I should probably get you back to town before the gossips have too much to talk about." Reality intruded on their peaceful moment, the propriety expected of a woman in her position, the reputation she needed to maintain as the town's healer. Yet Madeline found herself reluctant to leave the sanctuary they'd created. "Or we could get married today," she suggested, only half joking. Owen's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Today? Why not? We're both of age, both certain." She sat up, holding the quilt to her chest. "Unless you'd prefer a long engagement," he laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Madeline Owens, if I could marry you this very minute, I would. But there are things to arrange, a preacher for one. Pastor Williams comes through Camp Verde every third Sunday. That's tomorrow." Owen studied her face, searching for any sign of hesitation. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." She touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "I've spent 5 years alone, Owen. I don't want to waste another day when we could be building our life together." His kiss was answer enough, deep and thorough, threatening to lead them back to the activities of the previous night. With reluctance, Madeline eventually pulled away. "If we're to be married tomorrow, there are preparations to be made." She slipped from the bed, gathering her scattered clothing. "And I have patients who will be wondering where I've disappeared to." They shared a simple breakfast, making plans between kisses that grew increasingly difficult to end. The sparrow watched from its perch by the window, head cocked as if listening to their conversation. "He seems almost ready," Owen observed as the bird fluttered to a higher shelf. Madeline nodded, a sudden thought occurring to her. "Perhaps we could release him after the wedding, a fitting end to his part in our story." and a fitting beginning to ours. Owen squeezed her hand across the table. I'll speak to Pastor Williams when he arrives today, and I'll need to go into town for a few things. A ring, she teased. His expression turned serious. I have my mother's if you'd want it. She left it for the woman who finally captures my stubborn son's heart, as she put it. The thought of wearing his mother's ring, this connection to the family she'd never know, brought tears to Madeline's eyes. I'd be honored. They parted at the edge of town, Owen's kiss lingering despite the risk of being seen. Madeline walked to her small house with her head high, ignoring the curious glances from early risers who noted her rumpled dress and hair that had long ago escaped its pins. The day passed in a flurry of activity. Patients came and went, most unaware of the momentous change about to occur in their healer's life. Madeline cleaned her modest home, packed essential belongings, and laid out her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the green in her eyes, according to her late husband. As evening approached, a knock at her door revealed Owen, freshly shaved and dressed in his best, a small velvet box in his hand. I spoke with Pastor Williams, he said as she invited him in. He's agreeable to performing the ceremony after tomorrow's service. That's wonderful. She took his hands, unable to stop smiling. Did you manage your other errands? All done. He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold band set with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. My father brought this all the way from Philadelphia when he proposed. Mother wore it until the day she died. Madeline's breath caught at the simple elegance of the ring. It's beautiful, like the woman who'll wear it. Owen's eyes held hers as he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit that seemed yet another sign of rightness in their union. They spent the evening finalizing details, agreeing that Owen would move some of her belongings to the ranch after the ceremony, while she continued treating patients in town, until they could build a proper infirmary at the homestead. The practical discussions grounded their whirlwind romance in reality. This was no fleeting passion, but the beginning of a shared life. When Owen finally left, his reluctance evident in every step toward the door, Madeline stood watching until he disappeared into the darkness. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Sunday dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed designed for beginnings. Madeline dressed with care, arranging her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical knot. She'd sent word to Mrs. Peterson, who had been almost motherly in her care since Madeline's arrival in Camp Verde, and the older woman appeared at her door with wildflowers freshly gathered from the hills. Something borrowed, she said, placing a delicate lace handkerchief in Madeline's hand. Been in my family 3 generations. Thank you. Madeline embraced the woman who had been her first friend in this new place. That Owen's a good man, Mrs. Peterson continued, helping arrange the flowers in Madeline's hair. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but honest as the day is long. His parents raised him right. I know. Madeline smiled, thinking of the tender care he'd shown a wounded bird and later her own wounded heart. They walked together to the small church where a larger-than-usual congregation had gathered. News of the impromptu wedding having spread through town with the efficiency only a small community could manage. When Madeline entered, she saw Owen standing at the front beside Pastor Williams, his tall frame straight and proud in his dark suit. As she walked toward him, alone but not lonely for the first time in years, Madeline felt the rightness of this moment in her very bones. Owen's face, as he watched her approach, held such naked adoration that she nearly stumbled. The ceremony itself was brief, traditional words spoken with profound meaning. When Owen slipped his mother's ring onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, Madeline felt tears of joy welling in her eyes. Her own vows came from the deepest part of her heart, a promise not just to Owen, but to the life they would build together. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Pastor Williams declared, beaming at the couple before him. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Owen's kiss was restrained given their audience, but the promise of later privacy glowed in his eyes. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Madeline was surprised by the genuine delight on so many faces. These people, still largely strangers to her, seemed genuinely happy for their union. A small celebration followed at the town hall, hastily arranged but heartfelt. There was cake from the baker's wife, music from a local fiddler, and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. As the afternoon waned, Owen took Madeline's hand. "There's one more thing we need to do before we go home," he said quietly. They slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand to Madeline's house where Owen had left his wagon earlier. Inside was a covered cage containing their sparrow, alert and active within its confines. "Ready to set him free?" Owen asked as they climbed into the wagon. Madeline nodded, her heart full. It seems the perfect ending to this chapter of our story. They drove to a meadow near the homestead, their home now, where wildflowers still bloomed despite the advancing season. Owen carried the cage to a flat rock while Madeline spread a blanket nearby. "Would you like to do the honors?" he asked, holding out the cage. She took it carefully, feeling the bird's excited movements within. "Together," she said, placing the cage between them. They opened the door simultaneously, watching as the sparrow hesitated at the threshold of its confinement. For a moment, Madeline feared it might choose to remain, too accustomed to human care. Then, with a flutter of wings that seemed to echo the beating of her own heart, it launched itself into the air. They watched in silence as it circled once, twice, chirping what sounded remarkably like farewell before disappearing into the branches of a nearby cottonwood. "You think he'll survive?" Madeline asked, leaning against Owen's shoulder. "I think he has as good a chance as any." Owen's arm came around her, pulling her close. "We gave him healing, strength, and freedom. The rest is up to him." As the setting sun bathed the landscape in gold, Madeline thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment: a wounded bird, a lonely cowboy, a chance meeting that had healed more than just a broken wing. "Take me home, husband," she whispered, turning in his arms to kiss him properly, without restraint or audience. Owen's smile against her lips held all the promise of their future together. "With pleasure, wife." He swept her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, carrying her toward the wagon with long strides. Madeline laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as the joy of the day, of their union, of the life stretching before them, bubbled over. The homestead welcomed them as they approached, golden light spilling from windows Owen had lit before leaving for the wedding. He carried her across the threshold in the traditional manner, setting her down only when they reached the bedroom where their journey together had truly begun. "Welcome home, Mrs. Whitaker," he said softly, his hands gentle as they began removing the flowers from her hair. "I like the sound of that." She helped him with the buttons of his formal coat, each movement a discovery and a promise. "Though I may continue using Owens for my medical practice." "Whatever makes you happy." His kiss silenced further discussion as they celebrated their union in the most ancient way, learning each other anew with the knowledge that this was no stolen night, but the first of thousands they would share. Later, as moonlight spilled across the bed, Madeline traced lazy patterns on her husband's chest. "I never expected to find this again," she admitted. "Love, happiness, a future worth planning for." Owen captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Neither did I. After my parents died, it seemed easier to just exist, Care for the ranch, the animals, and expect nothing more. Until a woman showed up with a wounded bird, she teased. Until the most beautiful, compassionate woman I'd ever seen appeared on my property, yes. His smile was visible even in the dim light. Though I believe I was the truly wounded one, Madeline, you healed more than that sparrow these past weeks. She kissed him then, overwhelmed by the simple truth in his words. They had saved each other in ways neither had recognized they needed saving. As autumn deepened into winter, the newlyweds settled into a rhythm that balanced work and togetherness. Madeline continued treating patients in town 3 days a week, while establishing a small infirmary in a converted storage room at the ranch. Word spread of the healer who would travel to outlying homesteads in emergencies, and soon she found herself caring for families across the territory. Owen expanded his cattle operation, using medical knowledge gleaned from Madeline to improve the health of his herd. Together, they planted a larger garden than he'd maintained alone, planning for future needs with a confidence born of shared purpose. They often saw their sparrow, or one they believed to be theirs, flitting around the property, sometimes bringing twigs to a nest built in the eaves of the barn. Madeline took it as a good omen, a reminder of the unexpected ways life could change course in an instant. As Christmas approached, bringing colder weather and occasional snow to the high desert, she found herself increasingly tired, her usually boundless energy flagging by midday. When nausea began accompanying the fatigue, she recognized the symptoms even before confirming them with the methods she'd used for other women. She waited until Christmas morning to share the news as they sat before the fire exchanging simple gifts, a new medical text for her, hand-tooled gloves for him. "I have one more gift," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, "though it won't arrive until summer." Owen's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension to incandescent joy. "A baby! We're having a baby," she nodded, laughing as he swept her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the floor. "Careful! There's precious cargo aboard now." He set her down immediately, his hands cradling her face with exquisite tenderness. "When? How far along?" "Late July, I think, about 2 months now." Owen knelt before her, pressing a reverent kiss to her abdomen. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Your mother and I are very excited to meet you." The simple action brought tears to Madeline's eyes. She had dreamed of children during her first marriage, but fate had intervened. Now, approaching her 27th year, she would finally know the joy of motherhood. "Are you happy?" she asked, fingers threading through his hair. He looked up at her with eyes shining. "Beyond words, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted, Madeline Whitaker." The winter passed in preparation and planning. They converted a small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, Owen spending evenings crafting a cradle from pine harvested from their own land. Madeline sewed tiny garments from soft flannel, each stitch a prayer for the child growing steadily beneath her heart. Spring brought renewal to the land, and increasing roundness to Madeline's figure. She continued her medical practice, though Owen insisted on driving her to and from town as her pregnancy advanced. Her patients, especially the women, delighted in her condition, offering advice and hand-me-downs from their own children. As summer heat descended on the territory, Madeline's duties narrowed to the homestead and nearby properties. Her energy remained good despite her advancing pregnancy, though she yielded to afternoon rests when the heat became oppressive. One such afternoon in late July, as she dozed on the porch swing Owen had built for her, she was awakened by a sharp pain that left no doubt as to its meaning. Their child was coming, perhaps a bit earlier than expected, but with typical Whitaker determination. "Owen," she called, another contraction stealing her breath as she struggled to rise. He appeared from the barn as if summoned by magic, taking one look at her face before springing into action. The preparations they had discussed were implemented with calm efficiency: water heating on the stove, clean linens on the bed, and a messenger sent to fetch Mrs. Peterson, who had agreed to assist with the birth. As darkness fell and Madeline's labor intensified, she found herself drawing on all her medical knowledge to remain calm. Owen never left her side, his quiet strength anchoring her through waves of pain that seemed endless. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "Just like you do everything else." Mrs. Peterson arrived as the labor entered its final stage, her experienced hands confirming that all was progressing normally. When Madeline felt the overwhelming urge to push, the older woman nodded encouragement. "That's it, child. Your body knows what to do." With Owen supporting her back and whispering words of love and encouragement, Madeline brought their child into the world with a final, triumphant push. The infant's lusty cry filled the room, bringing fresh tears to her exhausted eyes. "A son, Mrs. Peterson announced, wrapping the squalling baby in a clean blanket. "And a fine-looking boy at that." She placed the child in Madeline's arms, the weight and warmth of him instantly dispelling the memory of pain. Owen leaned close, one finger gently tracing the perfect curve of his son's cheek. "He's magnificent," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Like his mother." They named him Samuel after Owen's father, with Thomas as a middle name to honor Madeline's. As summer faded into another autumn, the child thrived, bringing joy to each day with his curious eyes and ready smile. He had Owen's dark hair and Madeline's green eyes, a perfect blend of their features that delighted both parents. On a warm September afternoon, as Madeline nursed Samuel on the porch while Owen mended tack nearby, a familiar chirping drew their attention. The sparrow they were certain it was theirs now landed on the porch railing, head cocked as if inspecting the newest addition to the family. "Look, Samuel," Madeline said softly, turning so the baby could see. "That's the bird that brought Mama and Papa together." Owen set aside his work, coming to sit beside them. "Full circle," he said, his arms sliding around her shoulders, "from healing a wounded creature to creating a new life." The sparrow chirped again before taking flight, disappearing into the clear blue sky. Madeline watched it go, then turned to her husband with a smile that held all the love in her heart. "When I came west, I was looking for a new beginning, but I never imagined finding this much happiness." She leaned against him, their son cradled between them. "Thank you for helping me that day, Owen." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I should be thanking you, Madeline. You didn't just heal that bird, you healed me, brought me back to life when I didn't even realize I'd stopped living." Samuel gurgled between them, tiny hands reaching for his father's finger with perfect trust. Owen laughed, the sound of pure joy echoing across the homestead that had once felt so empty and now overflowed with love. As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter, Elizabeth, joined them 2 years after Samuel, followed by twins Michael and Catherine 3 years later. The ranch prospered under Owen's careful management, while Madeline's medical practice expanded to include a proper clinic in Camp Verde, where she trained several young women in the healing arts. They faced hardships, of course, drought years that threatened the cattle, childhood illnesses that kept them awake for days, the normal conflicts that arise in any marriage. But through it all, they maintained the deep connection that had begun with a wounded bird and a chance encounter. On their 10th anniversary, Owen surprised Madeline with a journey to San Francisco, their first real vacation since their wedding. As they stood on the deck of a ferry crossing the bay, he pulled her close against the chill wind. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer from the contentment in her eyes. Completely. She turned in his arms to face him. Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if that sparrow hadn't fallen that day, if you hadn't been riding by when I found it? Owen considered the question, his face thoughtful in the fading light. I believe we would have found each other somehow, Madeline. Some connections are too important to leave to chance. She smiled, remembering his words from long ago about currents that carried people to unexpected shores. Perhaps you're right. I know I am. He kissed her with the same tenderness he'd shown that first night, now deepened by years of shared joy and sorrow. You were always meant to be mine as I was yours. Back at the ranch, their children greeted them with excited stories of their time with Mrs. Peterson, who had long ago appointed herself honorary grandmother to the Whitaker brood. As they settled back into the rhythm of their lives, Owen with his cattle, Madeline with her patience, both of them raising their children with love and wisdom, they often remembered the sparrow that had brought them together. Sometimes, especially in spring, they would see what they believed to be descendants of that same bird, building nests in the cottonwoods near the house. Madeline would point them out to the children, telling the story of how a wounded creature had led their mother to their father, and how in healing it together, they had found healing for themselves. The most important kind of healing, she would tell them, happens in the heart. Remember that always. And in the quiet of evening, when the children were asleep and the day's work done, Owen and Madeline would sit on the porch swing, hands clasped as they watched the stars emerge above the land they both loved. No words were needed in these moments, just the simple, profound comfort of being exactly where they were meant to be together. From wounded bird to lifelong love, their story had unfolded in ways neither could have imagined on that fateful day in 1878. And as they faced the future with its inevitable joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, they did so with the unshakable certainty that whatever came, they would face it as they had everything else, side by side, hand in hand, heart to heart.